Good evening, Technosphere, and welcome back to number 3 of Virtually Buddha. I started doing this months ago and managed 2 consecutively and then fucked it up completely. And because I lack consistency. Anyway, I'm back now. And whilst I failed abysmally to record my thoughts and investigations into the Buddhist canon, I have not neglected the investigations themselves. So last time I was crapping on about the difficulty of language in trying to study Buddhism, and in the intervening 4 months, that difficulty has raised its head, and added to the difficulty of language has been the problem of sourcing reliable source material, because there isn't any. So, by way of explanation, the Buddhist canon was written down a good few hundred years after Siddhartha Gautama, the person that everyone knows as Shakyamuni, died. It's very long-winded, and when you try to read the sutras, they are repetitive, obscure, really, really difficult to understand, and in no way make any effort to clarify their points. So, now when I read the various sutras, they all have a very similar style. They go, "Thus I heard," and then they tell you about what the Buddha and his friends were doing. They were walking down the street, or they were sitting in some garden, or they were somewhere. And then some point is made at great length. Now, if you've ever attempted to read these things, you will know that there's not much light reading in there. Also, you will have noticed that it's very difficult to extract information from the very long lists of who was there and such like. So, these documents tend to obscure whatever it is that was being said. Now, having read them a bit, I understand that this is the recording of an oral tradition, and perhaps the reason it's so long-winded, repetitive and wordy is because it was an oral tradition that needed remembering. Okay, and I can accept that that was a very good way of making sure the information was passed down from generation to generation. However, I find it very, very difficult to believe that anyone, let alone a significant number of people, actually, one, sat down and listened to anyone banging on in such a human, unfriendly manner, and 2, that anyone extracted any information whatsoever from that, whether it be read or spoken. And that was my first problem in investigating the Buddhist canon. If only it was the last problem. It wasn't. So, not only am I faced with difficult, unwieldy source material, the entirety of the school of thought that is called Buddhism is not only divided up into a whole lot of different schools. Janet, hello Janet. Janet's my friend. Not only is it divided into a whole lot of different schools, but the different schools all disagree with each other. And they sometimes descend into actually slagging each other off and criticising one another in a decidedly un-Buddhist fashion. Having been a member of one of these groups, I had to leave because it was just embarrassing. And so not only am I faced with the unwieldy source material of the Pali Canon, there is also, subsequent to the recording of the Pali Canon, loads of people decided to take it upon themselves to explain what Siddhartha meant by systemizing it in all kinds of very confusing ways. It's all very confusing, is then Buddhist sects, blah, 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 said Janet. Yeah, I know. It's ridiculously confusing. And so, as I've been pondering this for quite some time, several things occurred to me. Firstly, that, as far as I'm aware, most peace organisations in the world are dominated by women. I know that the Buddhist organisation that I was in was dominated by women as kind of parishioners. I don't know about the Christian church or the Islamic church. Yellow hats, red hats, pro-Dalai Lama, anti-Dalai Lama, exactly. So, all the Buddhist schools that there are headed up by a bunch of blokes. Simon Billing, hello Simon Billing. Right, so, so all the Buddhist schools I can find are headed up by blokes. Well, actually, let me expand on that. All the religious movements that I can find that are of significance are headed up by blokes. Now, it seems to me highly unlikely that throughout the entire history of humanity that no woman has said anything notable of a spiritual nature. It just doesn't seem to be feasible. Obviously. And I don't really feel the need to explain why it isn't feasible, because it's fucking obvious why it isn't feasible, because the human race is more than half female, and they have ideas, even though they have been massively oppressed. Actually, being massively oppressed isn't bad for people's ideas. Actually, being oppressed sometimes helps you have ideas. Anyway, so no women's ideas have been recorded as being of import. No faith has given itself any women to lead it. So Buddhism, like all the other religious movements is being represented from a patriarchal perspective. How boring is that? And I would argue that it's not being represented from a patriarchal perspective, that it is being misrepresented from a patriarchal perspective, and has probably been misrepresented from a patriarchal perspective since Siddhartha. And given the fact that this system of thought is being presented with a patriarchal lens on it, that necessitates that one takes a highly systematic viewpoint. Kerry Osborne, hello. So, as one is aware that the lens through which one is trying to view the teachings is patriarchal, you have to be quite stringent in doing your research. And so I'm trying to be stringent in doing my research. And what I'm doing is I'm not taking anything as read. I am backing up any and all facts before I consider them to be facts. And unless I can verify a thing, I'm going to call it spurious. So I thought, right, I'll do this. This is the methodology I'll apply. And I'll be able to read the Lotus Sutra. And I will use Nichiren's notes on the Lotus Sutra to guide me through this complex document. So, I read the bit of the Lotus Sutra, and then I looked up Nichiren's notes on the bit of the Lotus Sutra. And he was explaining some stuff. And then I tried to confirm Nichiren's assertions as to his understanding of the sutra I was trying to read. And it seems to me that the things that Nichiren is saying in relationship to the sutra are not verifiable. So he says that someone's name may be translated as no birth. And then he goes on to say that their name being translated as no birth indicates a particular point in Nichiren's teachings. Now, so I googled said name. So Bloody True says that, yeah, Carrie, I know there's no women in the fucking Buddhist canon. So the name that Nichiren mentioned, I googled it, and it turned out that said man was indeed a follower of the Buddha, and gave all explanations about him, but nowhere did it say that his name meant what Nichiren said it meant. And I googled away and tried to find a translation of what Nichiren's, that matched Nichiren's assertion. Could I? Could I? Fuck. And that's really fucking upsetting and frustrating, because yet again I find myself frustrated in my attempts to fucking study the philosophy which I'm trying to live by. Which is no fucking joke, actually. So I've had to go right back to square one, all by my cunting self, which was not the plan. And I'm doing it, ploddingly slowly, and I'm trying to not begrudge doing it. And I am finding out a lot. I'm finding out great swathes of information. But the thing is, none of the information that I'm finding out is giving me any information about Siddhartha's teachings, which is what I'm trying to find out about. So, what it's taught me is that Siddhartha's teachings are being presented from the Dummy's Guide to Buddhism. Yeah! No, the dummy is lost in Buddhism. There is no guide. I'm not guiding anyone. I'm lost. I'm completely fucking lost. What I have identified is that there's a patriarchal perspective and a Eurocentric leaning to the whole of the representation of Buddhism, which makes it problematic to study in the first place. Then, added to the patriarchal and what did I just say? I can't fucking remember. I wish I could rewind. And it's a book. No, it's not a book. There's too many people. Janet says it's a book. Too many people have written books about books about books about books about books. And the thing about Siddhartha is he didn't write anything down. He just taught his teachings to people and expected them to tell the next lot of people. Maybe if he'd spoken in simple language, it might have been more effective. So not only has Buddhism been beset with a patriarchal perspective, and not only is it obscured by that, to further complicate matters, the whole thing is divided into a sectarian catfight in which everybody is slagging off everybody else and is saying how wrong everybody else is about their understanding of this teaching that's supposed to fucking save humanity. Obviously, it's not saving humanity at all. Hello, Raoul, my favourite. So this teaching that's supposed to free humanity from the sufferings of birth and death. Right? Now, which freeing humanity from the sufferings of birth and death is obviously a fairly noble aim. But if you're going to obscure what you're saying to the point where people are arguing about it and they don't know what it's on about, it's not very effective, is it? And if you're going to break it down to a point where it's so sectarian that no one can even talk to anybody else, you've obviously gone seriously, horribly wrong. So in my pursuit of this philosophy, I have come completely and utterly unstuck. One, because I can't find anyone to offer me a reasonable or rational explanation, or can't even find anyone to engage in a debate with me, because the people I'm engaging with a debate with are just as baffled as I am. And when I try to engage academics on the subject, they just blank me, because I'm not one. And when I try to read academic papers on the subject, I can't get into JSTOR because I haven't paid the academic fees. And so I just can't read the discourses about them, because JSTOR, in case you don't know, is an online depository where they keep all the theses on everything. And, well, it's a very useful resource, but you have to pay. And I can't afford it. So you've got to pay for information. And so my attempts to study Buddhism have come full circle all the way back to basically the freedom of information. Because the resources... Ooh, yes, please. But basically, the resources to investigate any given subject in an academic sense have been monetized. And it's not public information. Why it's not public information, I've got no fucking idea. And I suggest that everybody Googles Alex Schwartz, who is a young man who came up against freedom of information and was hounded to the point where he committed suicide. Which is not going to happen to me, because no one's going to give a shit about what I say or do. But, so my attempts to study Buddhism are ironically thwarted by my lack of access to information. And as we all know, information is power. And lack of information is lack of power. So it would seem, perhaps, that the information regarding the study of Buddhism, for example, is intentionally obscured so as to make it difficult for people to access and understand a system of thinking that could assist them in dealing with the vicissitudes of living. I think this may actually be the case. And it's not very good. And as I've probably said before, Buddhism, as we call it, doesn't actually exist. The system of thought set up by Siddhartha, he called it Vinaya, the Dharma Vinaya, which means doctrine and discipline. And doctrine and discipline of the way of the awakened. So I've been calling myself a Buddhist for 25 years. Now, Buddhists are the people who've set up various schools supposedly based on Siddhartha's teachings with all their various rules and regulations and perspectives. As it turns out, I thought I was in one of the schools, but as it turns out, I don't agree with anything they have to say. And I have a completely different understanding of the Dharma to them. So I'm not in the school, I'm not in any of the schools, I'm not a Buddhist, because I don't agree with what Buddhists seem to think. So it's like, well, fuck, well, what am I? I don't even know what I am. And what I've finally identified after quite some time is that I am attempting to practice the doctrine and discipline of the Way of the Awakened as laid out by Siddhartha. Now, seeing as how I'm struggling to find out what the doctrine and discipline of the Way of the Awakened as laid out by Siddhartha is, and there appears to be very, very little rational, sensible, non-sectarian, non-partisan, straightforward information on the subject, the term seeker of the way seems ironically apt, because whilst I am seeking the way, and I am doing my level best to practice a way that seems to be effective in my life, I've got no fucking idea where to look or what I'm looking for. So, a seeker of the way is what I am. And the horrible irony of all of it isn't lost on me, because at no point do I actually expect to find it. I will regale you with the next instalment on my journey of seeking the way next week. See you next Tuesday.